Hello, and my name is Pete Rushmer, and I'm your host today of a Half Dozen Things podcast. A Half Dozen Things is a podcast for business owners just like you. Whether you're an underdog hungry for success, or you're already smashing it but want to continue to level up, we are here each week for you to get insight and learning from the very best in the business. No fluff, no BS, and no self-proclaimed gurus talking about how easy business or life is.
I'm joined today by Tom Reddy. Those who are fans of the podcast will realise this is a second time that I've had Tom on the show. The first one was so popular, I felt like I needed to have Tom back for a follow-up. I don't know exactly how long ago it was, Tom, but I think it's good for at least a year now, or getting on for a year.
Yeah, it feels like it's getting on for you. It's definitely 2021, wasn't it? So
it was, yeah. So it's been a while, and Tom has recently done a seminar or a webinar even. Sorry, getting my language mixed up. But Tom recently did a webinar with me on charging and pricing for external transport managers, and I'm absolutely delighted to have you back on. I extend my apologies publicly as well. Last week we were due to record this, and I had a few bits kick off which prevented it from happening, which is the nature of what we do, right?
Very much so. Never worry about that, Pete. It's very much.
But I appreciate your patience. So
if it wasn't one of us, it'd be the other, wouldn't it? You know.
Yeah, exactly. I wondered this morning. I was like, I wonder if Tom will be a bit tit for tat, not deliberately, but just like that's how it is. Like, oh God, something's gone wrong with you this time. So, but no, it's amazing to have you back on, mate. How's things going? Like, I guess just give people a bit of an introduction if they've not come across you before, Tom. Just in a nutshell, who Tom is and what you do, mate.
Sure. So I suppose primarily I sort of refer to myself as a transport manager, and over the past few years I've been moving towards self-employment and working as an external transport manager primarily. I've got more into training, the transport manager CPC and driver CPC, and doing more of that, and then consultancy in the industry in general as well. So playing with all these ideas. My focus definitely at the start was external transport manager, but more and more I'm branching into other things and seeing what I enjoy the most and that kind of thing. But I'm sort of a long-term lurker on those groups on Facebook, so that's probably where you've come across me over the past few years, I suppose. So that's kind of me in a nutshell.
And you've got quite a Twitter following, haven't you?
Yeah, so that is a little bit of a different thing because that blew up on the back of a thread I made with my driver hat on. I was just getting ready to step away from my last bit of part-time driving employment, and I did a thread on a day in the life. So people were following that, and it got shared around, and you know how Twitter goes once it gets some traction. I think I got something ridiculous, like 30,000 likes on that thread, and then from there I got all these followers. So that's very much changed the dynamic on Twitter. I have to be a bit more careful about things I say now, but yeah, that was quite something.
Tom went viral.
Yes, yeah, it was. I really enjoyed it. It also did weird things to my mindset as well. It's quite hard to go from someone who's shouting into the void to then having an audience where, and I'm not saying a celebrity, but a few thousand people looking at things I tweet and commenting. So if you say something off-piste, you can soon get some anger and feedback from it quite quickly. And so you have to watch social media. It's quite an eye-opener, all that. But that was it was good. It was good last year. It blew up.
It's really volatile, isn't it? And I one of the reasons for me inviting you back on was that I wanted us to do a bit more of like an open forum. So people listening will be like, oh, what's the half dozen things today? And actually I've written a list of stuff on my notepad ready to sort of speak to you about. Last time I was looking at the half dozen things we spoke about, and they were maintenance audits, defect reporting, contracts, evidence, networking, and then like owning it. So those were the half dozen things before. And this time I wanted to just sort of chew the fat on a few things that I guess maybe in the last sort of 6 to 12 months, I've kind of changed my style a little bit. And I imagine you're probably feeling a bit awkward because I've not given you any prep at all. So But I quite enjoy winging it. And I just wanted to sort of talk to you. So I've got a list of stuff here, and I'll just pre-warn you a bit. I was going to talk to you about the ETM thing, being an external transport manager in the limited company and doing it as a sole trader. I wanted to have a bit of a chat about that because that's something that gets asked really regularly. And I know how articulate you are and how well you answer these questions based on our previous experiences. So it's a great tool for us to be able to refer back to. I wanted to have a bit of chat about the Transport Manager CPC and the syllabus, because I know you're doing a lot of training and that's something that's interesting me at the minute. I wanted to chat a bit about the Facebook groups. Bridge strikes are high on the agenda at the minute. Bit about restricted operator licenses. And then, obviously I was going to raise, I Googled, so sometimes I like Google, right? So I Googled Tom Reddy because I wanted to see how long ago our previous podcast was. And I Googled you and the podcast didn't come up because you're way too famous for that, mate. Like I got like the Mirror and the Sun and HGV driver, Tom Reddy. And it's about September last year, which I don't know if that's post or prior to our podcast. I probably ought to check, really.
Yeah, that's a good question, actually.
It was around September time, and things must have like gone a bit crazy. Is that the same thing as what happened with Twitter? Is it about that time that that Twitter blew up? Actually,
there were two things, and one of them was in your neck of the woods. What led to the HGV Hero thing. Now, being in Spotlight is not my comfortable place, but I had to get used to it in a certain way. So I don't want to come across arrogant at all. But that happened, this guy on the bridge in Peterborough, and I stopped and pulled the lorry over and sort of tried to help him. So that got some traction on Twitter because I was just shouting into the void and said, this happened to me today. And it was quite a lot to take on my head. And so that got a lot of traction. So I got some followers then. And then the next one was that day in the life of an HGV driver thing. Just when I was about to leave, because we know in this industry, publicity of the wrong sort is not always welcomed. It's a bit of a secret industry in many ways. And so I thought the only time I'm going to have the opportunity to do this is when I'm leaving, because if they don't like it, and they didn't have a problem with it in the most part, but they could not fully authorize it. Say, yeah, go and do this and put our name on it. So yeah, those two things. The big one was September, October, and also the driver shortage was in the news. So it was kind of a perfect storm. And I think that all led into the articles in the paper and things like that.
Yeah, they were leading largely on the driver shortage.
Yeah. So I thought, because like yourself, I'm passionate about this industry, and we've got a long history, mechanically and with drivers and everything. And I thought, this is my one opportunity. Call it your 15 minutes if you want, to actually raise a bit of awareness for what we do. And I at one time I was really ashamed of what we do, and I really had quite a hatred of it early days. And then I've learned to be proud of it and see how difficult it is and what it is to be a driver and a transport manager and that sort of thing. And it got very mixed reception as well. You can imagine I got in for a lot of targeted hate and harassment from some drivers for what reasons known best to themselves. But a lot of the public who didn't see the industry received it very well. And so I was quite proud of that little bit. So yeah, really interesting time. But like I said, it's a lot to take on my head. To be perfectly honest, and this was very surprising, somebody approached me and offered me to write a book about the industry. And I thought that's all I've dreamt about that for so long, but I haven't been able to do it. I've sat down a dozen times, not been able to get my head into it. All the kind of imposter syndrome comes along and then you just psych yourself out of it. So yeah, I've been struggling with the weight of that since it happened. So yeah, double-edged sword in a way. Interesting times though.
That is really interesting. It's there's loads to try and unpack from what you've just said there.
I know, the therapy with Pete Rushmore. Oh, he's a new podcast idea.
Mate, I'm not a therapist. I've invested my fair share of money with one though. So trust me. But you can see all the alarm bells going off, like writing a book about the industry and having blockers and that kind of thing.
Not as easy as it seemed at first. I thought that's many people wait their whole life for that kind of opportunity to come along, and I had this one there, and I feel awful for having not been able to deliver on it. But it is what it is. We can't do everything.
No, that's absolutely true. And I think to be fair to yourself, it's quite a transition you've gone through, because you have taken that transition from being a driver to being a transport manager to going self-employed as well, which is
whole other thing.
Last time we spoke, you were still doing some driving to sort of prop the venture up, so to speak.
That's it, yeah. So yeah, to remember, and this goes for everyone listening, to remember where you come from, because you can very easily discount. And I remember where there wasn't enough money and I had to go driving. And so now there is enough money, and that in itself is something to be pleased with. And it takes a lot of work to get to that point. And it could always be more. I'm sure we'll get there eventually. But it's come a long way in the short term.
No, that's really good, mate. Really good. And I think you've got to keep that on the to-do list. How open is that offer for writing a book? How long?
I think the publishers, they make a big thing, catching the moment in time, isn't it? Because it's moved on from the driver shortage now, and now it's the Johnson and our cabinet and everything else. But I'm sure there's a market for it. I don't know how much money it would make, but they were keen enough, if written in the right way. So it's something I would love to do, but I have no idea
it's a big investment, isn't it?
How do writers do it? Because it's a lot of time, and my time is round as I know yours is, and stuff, trying to fit it in.
I interrogate you about it because I've sat down, I've got the makings of a book, and I've got the format, I've got the layout, and I'd rationalised for myself at the beginning of the year that I'd do a bit every day. So I'd sit down and just do a bit every day, because the best way to eat an elephant is, well, you're probably not to eat an elephant, right? But the best way to eat an elephant is a bit at a time, right?
Yeah, get started, isn't it?
All that starts to go rotten after a while, probably. So it's probably quite hard to refrigerate as well. I don't know, we could get into all sorts of analogies, right? But this isn't therapy. So I'm no good. I'm no good as a therapist. It's interesting. I went. I do some NLP coaching. I don't know if you've come across NLP.
Yes, I've heard of NLP, yeah.
I heard me mention it, but I've got an NLP coach who I've been working with for the last 12 months. I've just done a public speaking excellence course with him and one of his co-coaches. And we've done loads of work, that whole imposter syndrome, all of that type stuff. And I've got a big speaking gig coming up. So Road Transport Expo. I'm going to do a talk. I'm sort of nestled in between, I think, MAN and Mercedes.
Right, excellent.
On one of the stages, and I've got a 15-minute slot to talk about what's your transport manager worth.
Brilliant, yeah.
Yeah, which is exciting. It's exciting.
It's a lot to I can imagine the pressure, but you'll be brilliant, Pete. I can't wait to.
Oh no, I appreciate that. So I'm going to try and record it, which will be a little bit unorthodox because I don't think people normally record these things, but I'm going to try and record it, and I'm going to be talking about what the pressure is of a transport manager, and how my belief is the transport manager is the most valuable person in a fleet business.
Yeah.
And that they need to be treated as such. It's something we touched on when we were talking about the external transport manager role, and how because the title's a transport manager, it makes it, I think, seem less significant than what the role actually is. So the purpose of the talk will be to get influence in people and leaders in the fleet sector to start to think about what the role of the transport manager really is or should be. That's but cool. also the level of investment that they need that they aren't getting at the minute. So, because as you know, it isn't just about being able to pass the CPC qualification. A great transport manager has to have lots of other skills, and they need that nurturing, they need that investing in, but also a successful transport manager will have a team of people to be able to help support them, because it needs to be recognised they can't do it all on their own.
Yes, absolutely.
So that's sort of the bones of what that talk's going to be. So hopefully it'll go well, mate.
Yeah, no, I look forward to hearing that. That'd be brilliant.
Yeah. Okay, mate. So we've talked about you being famous, which we now know. Sorry, mate. You're literally Pete, I'm never coming on a podcast with you again. No, it's not happening. Not happening at all. I can see it. I just wanted to touch base. One of the things that come up regularly in the Facebook groups, and something I know we're both on the same page with, which is a bit of a spoiler alert for listeners, but that's external transport managers being a limited company or being as a sole trader. So we're both quite categorical on that, but I still frustratingly see many transport managers. So just to sort of break the ice on it a little bit, we're both on the same page. An external transport manager has to charge as a sole trader, as an individual. You can have a business, you can have a limited company, but you can't carry out your transport management work under that limited company, because it doesn't meet what the statutory document is saying needs to happen under the legislation. And still, though, it gets challenged every time. Every time on the Facebook group, someone asks a question. Well, obviously, and people have obviously been to PI as limited company transport managers and not had an issue. And I think it's usually because they're, one, either lucky, two, the focus has been on something else, and the traffic commissioner can only really, they see and have to deal with so much, they can probably only focus on one thing at a time. So it's not been properly interrogated, I think is the only other way. So yeah, I just want to bring you in on that. Like, what's sort of your thoughts? What's your guidance on it? What's your experience?
Yeah, so that's my gut feeling as well. When people talk about their experience at PI, it's a bit like I was on the Iranian embassy balcony with the SAS. Everyone was there, weren't they? You know, that kind of. So there's a bit of that. There's also, like you say, you cannot go into a whole operation in the space of a 1-2 hour PI, or in some cases 7-8 hours PI. If it goes on like that, you just can't go into it. There is a question mark over whether all the traffic commissioners are 100% consistent in their approaches, because they all have different things burning inside them that they want to focus on, and they're entitled to do that in their own traffic area, because every traffic area will be demographically different. So there's an every chance that you've been to PI and you've come out with a good outcome, but they haven't specifically gone into your relationship, your legal relationship with the operator, which is fine. You know, that's as it is. And so you can come away perhaps with a false impression of that what you're doing is acceptable. Or maybe they're just bigger fish to fry on that day. They got, 100 vehicles that are potentially unroadworthy. Do they really care about how you're getting paid your, 500?
And I think that's the thing, Tom, isn't it? Because I think sometimes they'll look at a case and go, I can see there's a relationship and there's bigger stuff and there's stuff we need to worry about. So it doesn't even cross their thought process, because they can see there's a relationship. So they don't necessarily need to interrogate it, because there's more important things for them to be focusing on that day.
Kind of your name's on pieces of paper. You're clearly doing your job. The extra bits, they don't go into it. But I was curious about this because this has been going on, and I'm quite happy to say I was directly challenged on this by Mr. Nick Jones, who's the Deputy Traffic Commissioner for the West Midlands. Now, Nick Denton was on holiday, so I went up in front of Nick Jones, not as a transport manager, interestingly. I was a consultant for this company. But being in the witness box, as you know, they can go into you anything they want to. And so it came up what I was doing with other clients, because it was a question over whether I could help this client perhaps as a transport manager. Didn't all come off in the long term, but he specifically said to me, so how are you charging? And I said, well, I invoice them like this, and I do it from, the invoice from my limited company, but it specifically says natural person, Thomas Reddy, as transport manager, and there's no other services as part of that package. And he said, no, you can't do that. It's got to be a sole trade. So where does that leave me to go? I'm not going to say, hang on, sir, I think you're wrong there. And I guess if my pockets were deep enough, I could say, I think you're wrong. I'll get a solicitor and we'll go and discuss it with the upper tribunal. And then I think, why on earth would I want to go and do? So that's my personal experience. I'm told directly. And so, of course, I'm not going to be doing anything else. And if he's told them directly, he has a reason to believe that's correct. And why would they say anything different? So your mileage may vary, of course, but I believe it to be. So I looked into this genuine link thing, because that's what it's all about. Is the transport manager someone who's going to be turning up and doing the job? Mm-hmm. It's a naval term. It comes from, so much of law comes from ships and sea and all this kind of stuff. And so genuine link goes way back to this, some relationship with shipping, which I thought is interesting, because when you dig into law, trying to make sense of it. So yeah, it's the problem is the documents are written in a certain way that they need an ability to interpret what they're saying, and not all of us are happy doing that, or not all of us get a clear picture of what they're saying. And so, but I can see why logically you cannot be a limited company as a legal person, and us, me and you, we are a natural person. So you can't be charging from a legal person who's a separate entity and then having someone else do the work, because who's paying that someone else? If you're paying the legal person, the limited company, who's paying the transport manager, the natural person? It just doesn't tie up. You got money going over here, you've got someone doing the job over here. So you might think that's okay because the money comes back round eventually. But ultimately, it's about taxation, isn't it? If your corporation tax liability is less than your income tax liability, you're gaining an advantage, which goes against one of the principles of operator licensing, which is fair competition. So you can go around it in all sorts of different ways.
Yeah. So I think it's more to do with like the liability element of it, and it by nature a limited company is limited liability. So it means that essentially the whole thing with the reason you have a limited company is it protects. I have a limited company, which is Flagship Partners. I have a limited company, and as an individual, I also have assets. So, for example, my house. Yeah. Now, unless I do a personal guarantee on my limited company to my personal assets, so I do a personal guarantee. There's no, as a director of that business, essentially, I'm limited from the liability of anything that goes wrong with the business.
Yeah.
Reputationally, the two things are very different. Obviously, because reputation is one thing and liability is another. But I find it very interesting. I wonder what would happen if it was to be contested at an upper tribunal. I'd be interested to see what happened there, because essentially if the individual is delivering the services that are required and doing that, then I think it'd be an interesting thing. But I do agree with you that essentially those people that think it's okay because they've been to a PI and it's not been challenged will be directly because it hasn't been challenged.
Yeah,
I do agree with you. I think different traffic commissioners will probably approach it, or it'll be on their radar maybe more or less depending on the traffic commissioner. But I do know categorically in the East region, I'm not going to mention names because it's totally unfair, but I do have a friend who does external transport management, and he lost his repute based on the fact that he was invoicing under a limited company.
And there you go. Which we could talk about the update to Stat Doc 3, which is a recent thing, isn't it? And in there it says now the minimum loss of repute, is 12 months minimum. So if you've been, what's the word? I want to say cancelled. It's not cancelled. When they take away your repute, you've been basically taken out of the industry. Now before now it was up to them, but they're saying now 12 months minimum, and the way back in is to redo the qualification, or there's a mention in there of 3 months shadowing training, which is really interesting because that's the first time we've seen that. But if you look in Stat Doc 3, the paragraph about transport manager duties used to be 54. Now it's 57 because they've put in these new paragraphs ahead of it. So worth having a look at that. But, why would you risk it is the point we're trying to make. Your good repute, that's your ability to work, your ability to do the job in the industry. And you get taken out minimum 12 months. Some of them do get taken out indefinitely with no way back. But yeah, you're going on that genuine experience. I'm going on my genuine experience. So people have to be humble enough to go, hang on, have I really had a genuine experience with this, or I'm just getting away with it? Not the same thing.
Yeah,
It's Pete from Flagship Partners. We're really proud to sponsor a Half Dozen Things podcast. At Flagship Partners, we take road safety really seriously, and we're your road safety partnership. We help transport companies with compliance and training across their businesses, including first aid, driver CPC, and other transport management services. So if you're FORS accredited or you want to improve your operator compliance risk score, give Flagship Partners a call today.
Yeah, no, it's not. And what actually happened is to my friend that this situation occurred, he then employed Backhouse Jones, and they were able to get the decision overturned based on the fact that he had gone and amended all of his contracts and amended all the way that he was dealing with his external clients. So it did get overturned within the 12 month, within fairly rapid period, but there was obviously a challenge then for the chap based on his reputation with his existing clients as well, that he had to go and change his contracts with them.
And he won't be forgotten by the traffic commissioner either. Is the other? It shouldn't matter, but it will matter.
No. And that's a very good point that I hadn't really considered. But absolutely, the name. But I think it's challenging, isn't it, when you look at reputation, because we all know that there's external transport managers out there charging as a limited company. So therefore, I think I think there's worse things that you could be known for by the traffic commissioner. I think it's probably sort of I was sort of thinking how I could explain the point I was making there. There's definitely worse things, because particularly sometimes we do things wrong, right? And it's actually how quick we are to react and take responsibility and to sort the problem out. And I think if it's resolved fairly rapidly, then that's good. But there we go. That's sort of categoric from us. I certainly took advice from Chris Powell at Rotherham, who supported me, and Billy, who I'm trying to get on the podcast actually to talk about contract law. So Billy's his commercial. Did you speak to Billy?
I don't, indirectly, I think, because they prepared a contract for me based on what I wanted in it. And it was a long process. It was a very expensive process, but it's well worth it. And that's the basis. On the back of that issue, I did all this. And so it's all about what you do, isn't it, to correct things. Like you say, we're all human and make mistakes, but they want to see us putting it right. And you never know the difference between what people say on Facebook and what's actually going on behind the scenes. Some people don't have the ability to reverse their opinion publicly, which I think is quite a character trait now. If you are someone who's willing to have your mind changed and say, actually, I used to think this, but now I think this, that's okay. That's a good thing to have that ability to do that, because things change.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. And situations change, don't they? So, fantastic. Okay, cool. So, the next one I wanted to speak to you about was Transport Manager CPC training. And the syllabus. So when I was speaking to Beverly Bell previously, we did touch on the fact that the Transport Manager CPC qualification is challenging, but also, I guess the question I've got is, does the Transport Manager CPC qualification, and you train this, don't you? Freelance, is that right? Do you train it? Freelance?
Yeah, I work. So I don't have. I work for another company, and I just go in and do what they need me to do on a day-by-day basis. So some months they might not have much for me. Other months, obviously, the 3-month cycle with some of the exam boards, there's a couple of weeks in the classroom, and I go in and do that as a freelance. Yeah, makes sense in their business to do it like that.
And what I ask is, with the Transport Manager CPC, is does the training qualify you to be a transport manager? I know in reality it qualifies you, but do you feel that it does qualify you?
Well, 100% categorically no. There's a lot missing, but it's a good qualification. It's challenging. It gives you a good basis in the knowledge. We see that bared out by how difficult it is to pass, because there's a lot you have to retain. Maybe it's not fair that you have to retain it, because when you do the job in reality, you go to the reference books like any other person would. But it definitely doesn't give you the technical basis for what you actually have to do day to day, or anything about people management. Or it gives you the basics of HR, sure, but employment law and that sort of thing, but not actually how to do the job day to day. I find it's always the simple things that derail people. What should be simple on paper, a defect reporting system, can go wrong so easily. And if you're not prepared for how to fix that, or even how to see it when it is going wrong, you might just be plodding along thinking everything's working fine. Still catches me out, things like that, new things all the time. So no, absolutely it doesn't. And there needs to be something to bridge the gap, or a change in the, I don't quite know how you do that. It's a difficult one to cover, isn't it?
It is really. And I think that would be an unfair question to ask. I might ask it anyway, but what would you change? What would you change to make someone qualified to carry out the work? But I think there's a case for having like a staggered approach to the role, or having it staged. But I think what's very difficult is the things that make a great transport manager great, the technical stuff they'll have learned in the CPC that exists already. But I think the stuff that makes them great is the war wounds of the experience that they get and that they've learned from, which is very challenging to measure anyway, isn't it?
Absolutely. And everyone will have a different experience, won't they? Depending on the companies you've worked for and the sort of work you've done. Yeah, it really is. There's no one size fits all at all. But it's funny when you come together at a certain level, who people who've been doing it a long time tend to share, broadly speaking, opinions about things or ways of doing things. Or it's just funny how you go through the mill in all your different directions, and then finally at the other side, you'll meet up with people who are somewhere around, like on the Facebook groups, we find people who are doing what we do, and we find many similar viewpoints on things that aren't written down anywhere.
Yeah.
So just from getting knocked around, you do end up getting funneled into a pot. But it's a long road between that exam and when you think, like, I wouldn't have wanted to go into it. Many companies straight out of the exam. Thinking back now, how would I have coped? I wouldn't have known where to begin. I've been taken for a ride and all sorts.
I do worry with some, you know, I regularly see it. I've just passed my transport manager CPC and I'm setting up as an external. And don't get me wrong, if that person's got loads of lived experience having operated in the sector, then potentially it may be that they're unlikely to have a problem. But I see so much challenge around that. I think it can be a bit of a worry. But I sort of reflect on what would I change in the transport manager CPC syllabus to make it better, and I struggle to know. I struggle to pinpoint it. I think my belief is, and it's the solution which Fleet Geeks is trying to come up with, which I don't think is out there at the moment, and that is that there is a framework for transport managers to have this peer-to-peer element of where they have a structured learning environment that's like on the job. So it's current, they have the opportunity to go, this is a challenge I'm facing. And they are able to consult with, if they've got a group of 10 transport managers, all in different sectors, I'm struggling with my defect reporting system. How do you do it? And then you've got 9 people going, but everyone's getting an opportunity to listen to how everyone else does it. Yeah. And the opportunity for best practice sharing or overcoming challenges, I think, is really, really powerful by facilitating a group like that.
And I think if you were to say that in front of a TC, they'd have a problem finding holes in it, because you're saying, well, this is what I'm doing to try and mitigate against this issue of not having the experiences. So I've got this. Yeah, that's the thing. It's got to be something like that. A mentoring system, again, coming up with a system that makes you chargeable and a business venture as well. But it's written into the document. Now, how do you get this 3 months shadowing? Because there's nothing official about any of it. But how would you even prove it? I think it's very early days on that one, and we'll see what comes up in public inquiries over the coming years.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see sort of what goes on, won't it?
Okay, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not going to labour that one anymore. I was going to move on to the Facebook group. So I noticed that you're much quieter than you were.
Yes, yeah. That's going a bit off the back of what we said earlier about how social media is powerful when it can play into your mental health and things like that. And it's just a decision I've made. Now, I was trying to be, for want of a word that won't get people switching off immediately, mindful about being on there, and thought, how is this making me feel in this moment when I read this? And so I come up with things like, okay, I feel annoyed, I feel irritated, I feel like I want a fight, I feel like I want to correct this person. Are any of these things helping me in this moment? I was like, no, because I know what I'm doing with my clients. I don't want to have to go in there and second guess everything. But again, I'm cautious with that, because certain people do want to go in there and second guess things because they don't know what they're doing. And so it does give you a tool for that. But I was just finding it wasn't making me feel good, ultimately, going in there. And so I will stick my head in from time to time on the back of our webinar that we did, just to see how that was received, and give a few likes. And there are certain people on there who are full of really useful stuff. I'm grateful they're there. And just to pick one who I don't think I've mentioned before, but Pete, and I don't know who he is. I don't know his surname, but there's a
Pete Shepherd.
Pete Shepherd, yeah. So he has an absolute mine of information about all the most niche things you can imagine, particularly down DVSA, DVLA kind of things. So someone like that, I'm grateful he's there. James Adcoff's another one. I like to see the perspective of someone in a different corporate level and see how they look at things. But there are few and far between, I suppose, compared to the just generic noise of the rest of it. And so, I actually made a conscious decision. I've taken Facebook off my phone. So if I want to go on there, I have to sit down at a computer and log in. I did that with Twitter as well for 3 months, just to see. And Twitter's back on my phone now because I do enjoy that. I find it a bit different. But yeah, it's conscious and also losing the time to these. What am I getting out of this? No, I don't mean financially, but just what could I put my time into? Maybe napping on the sofa is what actually happens. But, the intention was to be more productive and think, well, I could have sat and revised my bridge strike policy or something with the 2 hours I've spent getting annoyed on Facebook. So yeah, intentional. I don't know if it's the right decision or not. There's a lot of good people on there, certainly.
I don't think you're missing anything, mate. I think it's interesting. I think, and it depends on how you use it, but it completely resonates for me about how it makes you feel. Sometimes I almost have this thing where I like to look at it because I like to think I see myself as like a content creator. So I have to create content, and what I try to do is create content that's relevant. So to be relevant, I need to listen to the conversations that are happening and what people are talking about. But I do rarely comment as well, because I get, as soon as you comment, you're kind of emotionally engaged in that conversation. And as soon as someone has an alternate point of view, regardless of how they've delivered that, it's going to cause a conflict in you. That it creates conflict, doesn't it? As soon as someone has an alternate view, and in reality, we may both be right.
That's the thing. It's, you have to be willing to be wrong, as I've just mentioned. But that does something I do think I do quite well, but it does take energy, doesn't it? Emotional energy to have yourself go, you know what? I think that's right, and I've been doing it wrong, and I don't mind doing that, but it does take energy to. Yeah,
it does. And sometimes you think, well, is it worth it? And sometimes good's good enough, isn't it? So, it's.
In many ways, that's where it all began for me, with a lot of stuff. So I have to remember the good things. But also the platform itself is quite chaotic and overwhelming, especially because there's about 7 different groups, isn't there? You've got your own, which is brilliant, but there's the biggest one, which we know about, and then there's externals, and then there's qualified, and then there's the one with the red banner, I forget. And they're all worth looking in for different things, but it almost wants to be, I don't know, but Facebook in general is chaotic, and I find it a lot overwhelming feeling.
Yeah. I do too. So, and that's really interesting point, because there are several transport manager groups, of which I'm sure the one that I run is the smallest by a long stretch. But what I see is it's kind of like a snowball effect.
Yeah.
Slowly over time, we've kind of gone from 350 people to like 400. All of a sudden, we're 500. We're nearly 600, and it's kind of slowly sort of staggering up. And I think because mine was opened a lot later than the others, I think a lot of people are looking at, oh, fucking hell, another transport manager group. And I get that because you have got qualified and external are both around 3,500 members. I think they sort of creep up from there. And the big one, the Transport Manager Forum, which is Dimitri's, is like 20,000, I think.
20,000 and plus. I think it's like just passage of time. And over time, on a long enough timeline, if the content quality is high, which yours is, it will go up, I think. And that will be, it's like YouTube. When you start YouTube, no one's watching you, are they? But 10 years, as long as you can be consistent, you might have 1 million subscribers, because as long as, the algorithm and everything else. But yeah.
It is an interesting thing, and YouTube is much the same. So we started YouTube. It took the amount of time it took us to get to 100 subscribers on YouTube. Like we're only I think we're nearly at 300 subscribers on YouTube, which isn't a big number by any stretch. And I don't pay for advertising or anything like that. And the content we do is niche, right? It is niche. Like I'm not doing fail videos that anyone's going to watch, or I'm not doing football videos. I'm doing really niche shit. And a lot of people who operate in our niche are fairly indifferent. They're like, why would I want to watch that shit? And that's fine as well, isn't it? I think, and that's cool too. So the numbers are going to grow slowly, but the time it took us, I think, to get to 100 subscribers, we've done 100 to 300 in half that time.
Yeah.
And then I think we'll go 300 to 1,000 probably in about a similar time. And it just kind of, that's kind of how it works, isn't it? It's that snowball effect, isn't it? Yeah. And then the other thing, like the podcast is incredible, because this will be something like 115th episode of the podcast, right? And when I look at the download volumes, and podcasts are tricky, right? Because there's so many different podcast apps. So you go to one app and you'll have like 7 followers. You go to another app and you've got 500 followers, and then you go to so it's very disjointed, but you can see the overall download numbers, and the pattern again is it becomes very steep, because when someone now finds our podcast, they've got 115 freaking episodes to look at.
Yeah, there's good content.
So all of a sudden, like the spike particularly as you create more, the spike just sort of goes up and up and up. But yeah, I think the thing is you can get into the vanity, can't you, of the numbers and the people and stuff like that. And I realised that if I want the vanity, I'd be better off paying for ads and probably doing something a bit less niche and what have you. So it isn't a vanity project. I'm sat here chatting to you because I actually enjoy chatting this shit.
Yeah, same.
I enjoy it, and I find it interesting. I find it fun, and the podcast was always there because I wanted to share my learning journey. Now, many people will think I position myself as the expert, and I'm absolutely not the expert in that.
I don't think any of us want to be felt about in that way. Just we like pushing on and learning new things and trying to get it right. And
exactly, yeah, absolutely. Like it's always a case of being in a position of learning, and always being in a position. And I've always interviewed people that I know that I can learn from, or get new ideas, or I enjoy, when you said about being wrong, I enjoy having my ideas challenged as well. Yeah. I love it.
Yeah, me too.
Absolutely love that. And I know, and I think the thing you learn when you go into a lot of the sort of personal development type stuff, and the NLP stuff really proves it as well. And that is, I have a certain lens that I look through everything, which is based on all the experiences, all the shit I've done, the way I was brought up, the people that I've been brought up around. I have a lens, this filter that I look through at life at. And Tom, you've got your filter, and the people that listen to this, they're listening to this, and it's traveling through their filter before they listen to it. And actually, when you start to think about what reality and right and wrong actually is, it's, even down to a traffic commissioner, you go and stand the traffic commissioner, whatever he hears from us goes through his filter or her filter based on the experiences they've had. And we're all subject to sort of this conditioning, I suppose. And I don't really know where I was going with that. Well, I guess it's just about learning and realizing those things.
It's a very human condition, I suppose. Traffic commissioners are just another human being, and they will have their filter, their circle of influence, and that kind of thing. And yeah, no, it's a good point. You have to be willing, I think, to be wrong, to be humble. You have to be willing to change your mind on things. I think if you want to be too fixated on this is the right way, this is the wrong way, it's going to be an industry full of frustration for those people.
And that's exactly the point I was making, is realizing that we all have our limitations in the way we view things and the way we think about things and the way we come to conclusions, because we've got all these preferences. And actually, sometimes the person who thinks about something a bit differently really is, can revolutionize the way you think about something, because they take it from a completely different. And sometimes actually you have to look outside a sector, because often in a sector, we're in a way, the Facebook groups and stuff like that, we're all conditioning each other to actually be alike, because we're all reading the same stuff, and we're all starting, all of a sudden we're absorbing the opinions and we're absorbing the thinking, and over time, and actually sometimes it takes someone from outside of a sector or a way of thinking that's done somewhere else, and dropping that in and going, fuck, that's like blowing everyone's brains. But
it's that echo chamber effect, isn't it? You will start to get that echo chamber, and you do have to be willing to go outside of it and see that's how all the big names in the world, Steve Jobs or whatever, they do something different and then it goes and blows up.
No, definitely, mate. Definitely. Do you know what, mate? We've been on the call for nearly an hour. I was going to talk about bridge process. I was going to talk about restricted operators licenses. But do you know what? Let's hold them. I've really enjoyed the chat so far.
Yeah.
I think it's been brilliant. And who knows? Maybe in 6 months, a year's time, we can sort of hop back on and talk about choose some fat over some other stuff.
Always enjoy coming on, Pete. So thank you.
Yeah, no, really, really appreciate it. I hope if you've been listening. Find Tom on LinkedIn. I know you're on LinkedIn. Tom Reddy, without an A, but with 2 Ds.
Yeah, and I've heard all the jokes over the years.
Yeah, I didn't have any. So I feel like I've let myself down there. But yeah, follow Tom. Your company's called Green Candle, isn't it?
Yeah, Green Candle. There'll be a website for that very soon, which I've sat on for 18 months, but finally got my finger out with that one.
Good man. Yeah, so Green Candles is business. And Tom, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. I hope people listening have enjoyed it.
Thanks very much, Pete.
No worries at all, mate. Take care, and thank you to the listeners. My mouse isn't working, so I'm going to do the awkward, I'm going to stop recording about now.
I really hope you loved today's episode, and if you did, please make sure you subscribe and listen out for future episodes too. Please do share it across your social media channels. We hope to reach more and help more people. If you want to find out more about me, my name's Pete Rushmer. You'll find me across any social media channel and my business Flagship Partners, and we're your partners in success across your business. Thank you. See you again soon.